Thank you, Helen. Thank you for that. So we've got a Mentimeter running in the background. If you do have a mobile phone, if you could use it to scan that QR code, it'll take you to a poll. I think we've got about 7 or 8 questions throughout the next 40 or 45 minutes at regular intervals. So as we talk through the content, we'll poll a question. We do have a question on the screen right now, and Ben has kindly posted the URL into the chat. So if you don't have your mobile phone, the URL should be in the chat. So I think we're going to give, how long, Mark? 30 seconds, 1 minute, just to answer this question. What is the biggest challenge facing Agile coaches today? So we've made an assumption that the majority of the people here are Agile coaches. I'm assuming that most people are working in an Agile environment in some capacity. So just answer this question from whatever lens that you've got, whichever cap you wear, and just answer this question as best you can.
Definitely some themes emerging from here. Okay. All right. Well, it's a good start, right? There seems to be a lot of different challenges facing Agile coaches today. And we'll get into this a little bit more to see, what others have said about this and what you can do about it. So Phil, I'm gonna swap back over. Yeah.
Cool. There we go. So that's me.
Take it away.
Thank you, Mark. So thanks for that introduction, Helen. Yeah, so we met a number of years ago. I've been working in software for over 23, 24 years. I've been an Agile coach for around, well, over a decade. What I've noticed is that all the different clients, different engagements that I've had, there's been a different interpretation and expectation of the role. We're going to ask a few questions around what is an Agile coach? What does the client expect from us? What do we expect from them? And how to be impactful. I've got lots of experience with Scrum. I'm a CEC with the Scrum Alliance, as Helen just announced kindly. Thank you, Helen. That is a long and arduous path. I'm also an accredited Kanban trainer. The most important one for me is in the bottom right there, that live bird. That's the emblem of the city where I'm from, which is Liverpool in North England. But like Helen said, I've been living in London for over 20 years. So London's home for me now. If you want to connect with me, use the QR code there. That'll take you to my LinkedIn. Please do. And I'm not going to talk about myself anymore. I'm going to hand over to Mark.
All right. Thank you, Phil. So mine's going to sound a little similar. So I've been in software for over 30 years, and surprisingly, Phil and I have been Agile coaches for about the same amount of time, just over a decade. The two of us met during the pandemic, actually, right in 2020, and got to know each other while we were honestly working towards our Scrum Alliance credentials. And we've been fast friends ever since, and really enjoyed the experience of working with Phil. So thanks to Phil for bringing me into this talk today and co-developing it with me. I'm based in the States, so I'm in Austin, Texas, in the Central Time Zone. It's funny. Phil had an earlier version of his slide that was basically had many more credentials on there. So he has taken it down a notch. These are the ones that I have, but I'm quite proud of them. There's a lot that we'll bring to bear today throughout the talk, and you'll notice this, Phil and I share a few of them. And so we're hoping to offer a lot to you today around how to become an impactful Agile coach. Here's also my QR code, same thing, LinkedIn. So if you want to connect, just scan that or just look me up on LinkedIn. So you offered a lot of different responses around what challenges Agile coaches face today. And there's certainly no shortage of those, especially with the economy and everything else. It's a pretty hard job. There is a report called the State of Agile Coaching Report. And in that report, they surveyed some number of people and came up with these. I believe you had some of these already. So there were things that we saw in your responses around mindset and culture. There were things that you had in your responses around resistance from leadership. There may have been I did see some things that related to maybe not enough time, or stakeholder buy-in, or organizational structure. So these are the things that other people said are the main challenges for Agile coaches. But certainly it's a tough job, and there are no shortage of challenges. So we're here to help you get better at your job, to make more of an impact. So when we talk about increasing your impact as an Agile coach, that's a tough job. Potentially it's a lifelong journey, right? It's something we're always looking to do and get better at. And what we want to do here in the talk today is talk about how we can build trust with your clients, how we can work with systems and do things like systemic contracting so that we are agreeing on how we're going to work together and what we're working towards. We want to think about how we know we're getting better and how we get feedback from others that allows us to improve. And so we'll talk about reflective practice. And then we'll get into API, which is Authority, Presence, and Impact, which is a model by Peter Hawkins that talks about how to make a real impact as a coach. What are the things you can do? And we'll go through those elements together. And by the end, you should have some ideas on ways that you want to improve your impact as a coach. Phil. Phil, you are on mute.
Hello.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Yeah, so we haven't got an agenda. We formed an agenda from the abstract. So obviously we've assumed that the abstract is why you're here, and we've elicited some of the outcomes from that abstract. So one of the things we're going to cover is how to maximize your impact as an Agile coach. I've got an interest in that word impact, so we're going to explore that a little bit. We're going to understand the crucial role of trust in transformational change. So a lot of what's expected of us is actually changing in the people that we're working with. It's complex, it's not easy. Understand your position and influence within the system that you operate in, how you can see what your influence is and how you can change that. And how systemic contracting can help, or what even is that? The other thing is professional reflective practice, otherwise known as supervision. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and how it's benefited me. And understanding, as Mark just referenced, the API leadership development model, which I found really useful in my own reflective practice and also in my supervision with other team coaches. So what we're going to do is present a bit of content, and we're going to try and facilitate the learning by using Mentimeter to ask some questions. Mark and I would usually use a more interactive approach. We weren't confident in doing that because we didn't know how many people were going to turn up. We didn't. We thought it'd be easier given the circumstances in inviting a bit of dialogue if it's necessary. So we're going to read the room. Please put your hand up if you've got a question to ask. Ben and Helen will keep their eyes out for any hands that are up. Helen, Ben, please let us know if there is a question. We do have a bit of time to answer questions on the fly. We do have at least 10 or 15 minutes at the end, possibly, depending on if we overrun or not, to have a more a fuller conversation, if you like, after we've gone through all of the material. So yeah, Mark and I are going to facilitate that. We're going to well, we've just talked through the agenda at a high level. Your participation is invitational, and the expectation is that you answer the polls if you can, if you want to, and do put your hand up if you've got any questions at any point.
Yeah, we're here to serve you today. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get you back into Mentimeter to answer the next question. So Phil, can you advance us to the next one if you haven't already? Okay. It's the same code, okay? So if you're already in there, you should already be able to answer the question. We just continue to offer it, and Ben, thank you for the link, just in case you've lost it. So you'll want to stay in there once you start answering questions. But the first place to start is what is expected of an Agile coach? You can't make an impact without knowing why you're there. Wow, okay. Magic. Oh, that's beautiful. It's very interesting reading these and hearing kind of maybe some of the voices are that are coming up, you know, from our audience today. You could get a real sense of how this feels for you in your world, just reading these. Let's see.
Magic.
Magic questions.
The Jira expert.
Oh, beautiful. You just made Phil's day. That's a running joke we have. Management, culture, yeah, culture change. Doing correct values. Interesting. Facilitator coach. Okay. We got one more coming in. Okay. It's a lot here about change, about stakeholders. I saw some things about teaching. There might be some things about tooling. Anything else stand out? It's a hard job, I think I could get from this, right? Massive change with no control. Magic seems to apply. It's hard or easy, depending upon how you view magic. All right. So this is how you see the expectations on an Agile coach. Let's consult another resource. So the Scrum Alliance says that an Agile coach is someone that helps organizations, teams, individuals adopt Agile practices and methods and embedding Agile values and mindsets. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff about making things better, more transparent, improve products, services, yada, yada, yada. So in summary, and magic. And so the Scrum Alliance also goes on to say that these are their expectations of an Agile coach. Adopting Agile practices and methods. I think everyone would agree to that. Embedding Agile values and mindsets. Foster more effective, transparent, and cohesive teams. Usually the place people start. And then enabling better outcomes, solutions, products, services, right? At the end of the day, that's one of the top things you want to be able to prove that you've helped do, you know, is to help their customers or stakeholders and so on. So how can we be impactful within this context, Phil?
Well, so I think the first thing to acknowledge is that all of those things are difficult to do, especially if you expect one person to come into an organization and have the responsibility to do those things. So adopting Agile practices and methods is effectively, potentially changing the way that groups, systems, whole organizations of people have been working for a very long time. Very well, thank you very much. So it's difficult it's difficult to go in and shift someone's behavior, their professional experience, their expertise, without any kind of agreement. Embedding agile values and mindsets is, mindsets and values take years and years and years to develop. I don't know how long to undo. Foster more effective, transparent, and cohesive teams. Lots of organizations have grown into organizational silos whereby teams are given incentives and rewards around the department that they operate in, not necessarily proper teams. So all of this stuff is hard. This is all big change, is the point that I wanted to emphasize there, Mark. So yeah. In our experience, our shared experience, obviously there's lots of training and learning and very valuable and worthwhile training programs that you can go on, which give you the tools, the approaches, the different experience to be better equipped to be an agile coach, to do those things. We're not gonna talk about those things in the next 40 minutes. What we have got, if you can click through, Mark, is in our experience, these are things that you can work on yourself. So these are self-awareness, personal development, competencies, skills, meta skills that you can do tomorrow and beyond yourself without paying £10,000 to a training provider. And there's these 4 things that we've got. So always be contracting, develop your relationship systems intelligence, professional reflective practice, and developing your API are 4 things we believe will give you a head start in being impactful within this context. So impactful being having a marked effect or influence on someone or something. So it's not insignificant. So I think that the point I'm trying to make here is that being an agile coach is quite a significant role. And unless you have clarity on that role, the expectation of that role, then it's difficult to be successful. So we're going to talk about each of these things over the next 30 minutes. So contracting, always be contracting. So contracts are everywhere. So if you buy a house, you get a contract. If you get a job, you get a contract. A lot of paper contracts are underpinned by verbal or psychological contracts. So if you buy a house, you agree a price, and then it takes, depending on what country you live, 6, 9, 10 months to get all the legal paperwork done. In professional coaching, there's a term you may or may not be familiar with. In professional coaching, there's a term contracting, which describes the agreement that you have with either an individual or a team. So what's the goal we're going to meet? What are the measures? When are we going to meet? And how are we going to work together? How are we going to be together? So it's kind of like a dialogic, a conversation contract, a verbal agreement, which sets out the seed for that relationship. You can create a contract with an individual coaching client and a team. What is more complex is when you want to contract with an organization. So we talked through the expectations of an agile coach, and I am going to ask a question here. How many just put your hand up if during the onboarding process you go through some kind of contracting process with the organization that you are about to be an agile coach in? So do you discuss and agree what outcomes do you want? Do you discuss and agree what good will look like when you've achieved those outcomes? Do you discuss conflict, alignment, roles and agreements? I can see a lot of hands going up, which is great.
Yeah,
So
one of the biggest challenges you can have starting out on a new engagement is when you have one idea of what you're supposed to do and they have another, and you don't talk about it, and you work at cross purposes.
yeah, so you're doomed to fail. So unless you have you know that conversation, a transparent conversation around what is expected and how am I going to participate in that, you're always at risk of failure. So within this concept of systemic contracting is less straightforward, because for a number of different reasons, primarily because the outcomes that the client wants isn't adopt agile practices and values and mindsets. It's often to get faster to market, to win new business, to be more transparent, to be more predictable, or something like that. There's a belief that the agile coach will do some stuff which will be in support of that outcome. So I believe that the first task is to have that conversation around outcomes, the alignment of what's expected of me, how I'm going to participate in achieving those outcomes, what are the measures of success there, what's the alignment between the work that we're going to do with the teams within the organization and the meta outcomes that you've got, where's the conflict. So if one team is being asked to be more transparent and predictable through implementing some agile practices and principles, what's the cost of that to another expectation of that team within the organization, and how are we going to manage that when it arises? So that's facilitating conflict. The roles and responsibilities around who's involved in this, what's the contribution, what's the participation. So how are we mutually accountable for achieving this outcome? What part are we going to play? What role are we going to play? And the agreements is what are the ways that we're going to work together. So as our agile coaches, we don't just do coaching. We do, there's a number of different competencies around training, facilitation, mentoring, and there's a whole, agile coaching competency wheel, which some of you may know we need to put these different hats on at different points in time. So we have got another question here, which is probably
if you are
now.
Good.
I'm looking
Yep.
if we got some answers.
Yeah, no. Yeah, all right. So but we need to make sure that it's advanced, right? So hold on one second. Here. Okay. You should now see the next question. What's most important to resolve with contracting? And we got one response. And the link's still in the chat for anyone that needs it. Yeah, while we're getting some more responses, I mean, the word that really comes up for me, Phil, when you were talking is partnership. And the way that you listed the expectations of an agile coach, it's a hard job. And that means you can't do it by yourself. You're going into an organization, and the stronger the partnership can be, and there's a strong lean here towards outcomes, right? Towards working towards the same goal, the better off your chances of succeeding with them and for them to succeed, which is what everyone wants in the first place. That's why they hired you. All right. It looks like this has died down a bit. Strong pull to outcomes there, Phil. Anything you want to comment on before we head back?
Well, no, I mean, so agreeing outcomes is obviously the first thing to do. Yeah, why am I here? What we're going to do together? what outcomes do we want to achieve? Yeah.
All right, so you ready?
Sure.
You said
Yeah.
something about a wheel.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did mention this earlier on. So this is the way that the Agile Coach, the different hats that the Agile Coach wears. So when we're talking about the different ways of being, the different ways of working, these are the competencies that we should seek to have.
Yeah, and some of them may be more needed than others on an engagement, right? You may be leaning into, the client may ask you to do more in one area and less in another. So you
Yeah.
can use this in your
Well,
contracting process.
I just want to, just a load of training. Yeah.
All right. So we talked a little bit about contracting, and when we do contracting, we're really, as Agile coaches, we work with systems. So I don't know if you use that term when you're talking about people, with teams, organizations. Yep, I see some head nodding, Phil. Thank you. Systems are groups of people with some kind of shared goal or shared purpose. And what's great is when you start to think of people, or your job is working with human systems or systems, you can start to see them as a single entity, and all the voices that comprise that belong to the system instead of belonging to the individuals. And that your job is to work with the system. That's your client. And one of the things that I loved about coaching when I first learned it was this notion that in order to coach somebody, you need to believe that that person, and I'll extrapolate that to a system, that person is creative, resourceful, and whole. You need to truly believe that when you're working with them. And the same thing is true when you work with an organization. They're not broken. You're not there to fix them. They have everything that they need to be successful, and they have been successful before you. And so it's important that you kind of bring that mindset in as you work with companies, with organizations. So from that, we have a concept that's really important called relationship systems intelligence. And so you're probably already familiar with emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is extremely important. And it's frankly, I find it's a lifelong journey, right? We get good at it, and it's really all about self-awareness. How do we act in certain situations? How do we respond? Do we choose our response, or do we just react, emotionally? Do we learn to, when we feel stress, do we feel it in our bodies and kind of notice that first? And then maybe sort of take a breath and figure out how we want to respond, or do we just quickly react, right? Do we act out of fear? And so emotional intelligence is a strong base on which we can build upon. So from that, that's really just inwardly focused, and you're going to need that as an Agile coach, and we'll talk about that more later. But the next thing is really social intelligence. So you're in a room full of people, right? These systems, these organizations, these teams, you need to be paying attention to what's happening for them. You could be conducting a retro, you could be doing a big room planning, you could be doing any number of things. What are you noticing about them? What's happening for them? Who is experiencing some stress? Maybe it's not stress, maybe it's joy. Maybe there's something you need to lean into there. It's just about noticing what's going on and attending to anything that needs your attention. So here you are, just sort of noticing what's happening with other people. So not surprisingly, relationship systems intelligence really talks about having an awareness of the system. And it's really about us, about all of us. So it's not just the people in the room, it's you also. You are part of that system. And so what we want to do is look at anything that's happening, any interactions, any experiences as expressions of the system, and things that are trying to happen in the system, even conflict. We talk about conflict as the urge to change, right? It's not a problem to solve, it is an urge to change. So you're looking at what's happening and attributing it to the system and getting curious about what the group or the system needs at that moment in time. And so it's all about just working together and improving the collective system and the health of the system. And so there's some key components of RSI, which is the acronym for Relationship Systems Intelligence. One is to really look past a group of individuals, and this can be super hard. If you are working with people, and especially people that have worked with each other a long time, you know, like Phil and I have worked together, right, for a little while. So Phil might start talking about X, Y, Z, and I'm going to go, oh, there goes Phil again, right? And he might say the same thing about me, but when we're working with a group of people, it's important to get past that and start to say, what's happening here? One person's voicing it, and that person's just occupying a role in the system. And this is something that we need to notice as part of the overall system. We don't attribute it to just one person and wonder why that person is bringing this up. We treat this as part of the information that we can deal with. And so the system is a third entity. So all voices in the system need to be heard. If you ignore a voice, there's going to be some kind of tension that is still going to be there that could be getting in the way of you trying to achieve your goals with them. So you want to be able to notice the voices and have people treat them with respect and look at them as possible source of information. What is this trying to tell us? I mentioned this already, but basically conflict is something you need to be able to handle, and you need to deal with it in skillful ways. When we can deal with conflict skillfully, we get stronger. The system gets stronger. When we deal with conflict in a unskillful way, we start to damage our relationships. And tending to our relationships and making them stronger is so important. So if we can get everyone to start seeing conflict as a signal that change is needed, we'll have less defensiveness, we'll have less aggression, we'll have more curiosity, and we'll be able to make use of the conflict to get better. And then the last thing, and then there will be another poll for you, is being able to read the system. So you're in a group full of people, you're having a conversation, you're doing an activity, you're working towards a goal. What's going on? There might be things that are being said. There might be things that you see. Maybe there's body language. Who knows what's happening? But how would you start to name the emotional field? How would you start to give some names to describe what's present for you right now as a way to express what's happening in the system? So again, we're going to head over to Mentimeter, and I'm going to ask you to think about what's happening for you right now in our system. We have a system right now. So this group together is one collective system. And I'm going to ask you to try to name the emotional field that's happening for you right now, or what you're noticing in other people that are on camera. So let me get out of here and see what you've got to say. One word, how would you describe the emotional field? There are no wrong answers. Name the emotional field right here and right now. Beautiful.
See a count mark? Just I'm curious. I'm curious.
Yeah, it's in the lower right. We've got 23.
So what I meant is, how many times has curious been?
Oh, I can't tell that from here, but you can see it's bigger, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Is it? We could do a planning poker. Is it 5 times as big? Is it 8 times as big? What do you think? So basically relative sizing. All right. Okay. So there's definitely, so it's interesting, right? So as we talk about the emotional field, there's some things that are positive and interesting. There's some things that are maybe, okay, some people are in a different spot, right? So not everybody is the same, and that's okay. And so if we were working with you as a group, we would start to explore some of these a little bit. And we would start to dig into them and figure out what do we need to change? What do we need to lean into more? Right. And so we just get a sense of what's happening for the system here now. So the other thing that happens, and this all comes from ORSC, which is basically relationship systems coaching. There's a whole program on this of like 7 classes. And so a lot of this material, relationship systems intelligence, comes from this group, from CRR Global. They have this concept that's fantastic called edges. So when people are going through changes, they have basically the left edge is sort of status quo. It's what's happening today. It's how you see yourselves in your current world. It's your role, your identity. It's what you are doing now. And then the Agile coach comes in and says, hey, we're going to work in new ways. We're going to form new cross-functional teams. We're going to be transparent. We're going to collaborate. We're going to make decisions by consensus. We're going to do all these crazy things. And we're going to try to get into the secondary identity. So there's a shift we're trying to make from the left side of the triangle over to the right side of the triangle. And when we try to make the transition from the left side to the right side, we experience what's called an edge. And an edge is when we become uncomfortable. We become uncomfortable with the change. We might become fearful of the change, right? And so as we're crossing the edge, certain things start to happen. And some people may actually be trying this new thing out. They're like, I'm going to try Agile out and see how this works. So they've made it to the other side, but there's still some tension there. Some people may be highly resistant. They're like, I don't know about this. I want other people to go first. What's this going to mean to my role? They have all sorts of questions and fears coming up for them, and they're not eager to try this out at all. So we position them further from the point of crossing, right? They're here, and it would take much more for them to cross at that point. And other people, somewhat resistant, but maybe not as much. And so this is a model you can use to start to notice where people might be more or less resistant to the change and how the change is going for them. And noticing this thing helps you figure out whether to kind of push faster, go slower, try a different tactic. Edges is important because it's normal. And so you need to be able to normalize the fact that they feel this way. You need to be able to surface the fact that they feel this way. So edges are a nice thing to be able to know about and possibly even discuss with the other people that are going through the change. And you can start to notice what behaviors may be coming up for them. So does this concept of edges sort of make sense? That there's some kind of discomfort that happens for people when you're going through change? Okay, so we're going to do what we don't have many more polls left. So I know we've done a few, but we do have one right now. And it's going to be around what behaviors have you noticed? Let me get the exact question right. What behavior are you likely to see in someone who is subject to change? So what behavior are you likely to see in someone who is subject to change? So how would you notice this? Yeah, interesting. What does that look like? Is that screaming? What is it? Whining? Yeah. Yeah, if resistance is a behavior, what is it? Is it saying no? Is it saying yes but refusing to do it? What is it?
And you see resistance.
Disorientated, interesting. So confused, maybe? Yeah. Stable, acting out, skepticism. Yeah. So these all become things you can work with if you notice them. Right? Apparently we all see these things all the time. Joking to distract, uncertainty, frustration, making for right. Exactly. So as you notice these things, these are voices of the system. These are behaviors of the system. They're attributable to the system. They're not necessarily problems to solve, but they are things to bring to the attention of the group and figure out how you can surface these in a way that makes the system stronger. So Phil,
Yeah,
let's transition into how to get better.
Yeah, so working with change is difficult. So we just listed out what we see when people are subject to change, and when we kind of generally feel responsible for that. So we're kind of put in a position whereby we're the agent of change without permission. So I'm just going to ask a question to the group. If you just raise your hand, if you've ever felt isolated as an agile coach, if you've ever felt isolated, yeah, I think that's
Lonely.
Lonely. Isolated, yeah, alone, on your own. So I can see a few hands go up. I certainly have felt challenged, and I have sought out professional reflective practice. So, you know, given the challenging nature of the role that agile coaches undertake, it's often necessary to get some support. Supervision comes in a number of different forms, generally developmental. So that's mentoring the coach on their professional development. So how do I get better at being an agile coach? Qualitative, which is providing external perspective. So that's someone from outside the organization, keeping you sane. You know, there's a saying, the status quo is what you stop noticing when you've been in an organization. I don't know whether it's 3 or 6 months. If you can't see what's different, then you can't, you know, it's difficult to be impactful. So I've certainly seen Scrum Masters and coaches just fall into the status quo of an organization and just keep ticking over as they are without introducing any change. The other is restorative. So generally keeping you sane, providing support, and checking on your well-being. So I've had supervision for the last 4 years. I found it really beneficial for a number of different reasons, primarily to develop my own competence and keep me sane. It does help. The theme of my supervision is actually, how do I become increasingly impactful as an agile coach? So during my supervision, those terms, what we've gone through the process of bringing clarity to those terms. So what is an agile coach and what is impact? So I describe it as the balance of the skill of having a balance between disruption and collusion. So it wouldn't go down well for us to go into an organization and tell somebody what to do because we're the expert in a particular process. That's not very well received. So finding the balance between, you know, disruption and collusion, in my mind, is the skill. And I was introduced this model, I think, I don't know, a number of years ago. It was developed in the 90s. Very simple leadership development model called the API model. It's got 3 dimensions. The theory behind it is that the 3 dimensions enable trust. So if you've got appropriate authority, presence, and impact, you have the trust necessary within the relationship with the individual, the team, or the organization to take them through a transformational change. Now, when I first seen this model, I wasn't really comfortable with the word authority until I understood, because I'm not a person who has a lot of authority. It just didn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with the coaching approach either, I don't think. However, as I've become more familiar with this model, I've become more comfortable with it. So your authority is defined as your past. So it's your what you know, who you know, your accreditations, your experience. Helen, I'm gonna call you out as you've got an authority on Kanban because you're the Kanban queen. That's what we call you behind your back, and to your face. So what you've done in the past and what credentials you've got is your authority. So your authority is what you have before you go into a room, effectively. Your presence is how you are, how you listen, how you interact, and how you are at the current time in the present. And your impact is how you intervene in the there and now. So each is labeled past, present, and future because your present is how you are there and then. Your impact is determined by the intervention that you make and its impact in the future. So what changes? Do you want to move on to the next slide, Mark?
Yeah.
So authority is, if you want to click through, just click through quickly because I've talked through. So it's your competence, your credibility, your past experiences, academic achievements, what you know, who you know, the communities you're part of. It's what you take into the room. So it's often what gets you an interview. It's often what gets you a job. Your presence is the next slide, please, Mark. Your presence is how you are there and now. So your being, your relationship systems, intelligence, as Mark was just describing before. So we've got another, is this the final one or is this the second?
I think it is.
Question. What would be different for you if you had more authority than what you do today? So given how I've just described authority as that leadership dimension, if you had more authority than you do today, what would be different for you?
Thank you, Ben. Mm. Mm. Mm.
People might listen more. Yeah. So your authority actually influences where you enter into the system. So if you are the Kanban queen, arguably you could be recruited by someone with influence within the organization. So therefore your authority within that system is at that level, is influenced by that level.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've got one question to pose to the group. So how many of you, and raise your hand if this is you, are internal Agile coaches? You are a full-time employee of a company that you also serve as a coach. Yeah, quite a few. Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, the reason I was curious about that is I think there is a distinction there in authority sometimes between internal and external. And I think sometimes internally you have to work harder almost to be able to build your authority within the system. I don't know if you find that to be true, but
I'd imagine it to be true.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. So that's a little bit on authority. Let's talk about presence. So you're always going to hear this: presence is a gift, but okay. It's horrible jokes, but they're here. So it's about just being fully present. I'm being positive, I would add to that, and being attentive to others. It's about being able to get out of your own head, your own ideas of what needs to happen next, your own anxiety, or whatever is happening inside of you, or your own ideas or your biases, all these things you have to let go of to be able to be there for the group of people you're working with, to be fully present. And I would add to that it's, you can be intentional before you show up with this group of people. You can set your intentions on how you want to be and how you want to show up. And then you're going to get tested because something's going to happen that you don't expect to happen. And so part of your presence is also going to be about how you show up under stress and how you want to be under stress. And this is actually a great way, a great area in which you could get supervision, right? And you could get, hey, I noticed you do X, Y, Z. Maybe they observed you, right? I noticed you do X, Y, Z when this happened. Oh, I didn't even notice that. Okay, what can you do to notice that next time? And so presence is so important because however you are in that moment, people are going to notice, and they're going to take a cue from you, a lead from you. And so there are a number of things that you could embody or embrace, different characteristics of presence. Each of you is going to have your own presence. You're going to bring something that is distinctly you. You're going to have your own personality, your own style. But there are some certain things that you need to be aware of. For instance, how well do you listen and how do you listen, right? When you speak, do you use words that are your interpretation of other people's words, or do you use their words? Are you neutral when people say certain things and just become curious about it? Or do you have a reaction like, oh, that was something bad? Do you go fast? Do you go slow? What's your energy? Are you kind of just the same tone the whole time and just kind of even pace? Or are you playful sometimes, serious other times? What about your body language? Are you, what's your posture look like? Are you looking at the same people all the time? When you're speaking, what words do you choose to use? What tone do you use? Are you speaking loudly? There's a lot of things that go into your presence that you can become aware of and that can make your presence stronger within a group, because each of these things you do has an effect on the group. If I go really fast and the group is kind of nervous about something, I may not be helping them calm down. I may need to slow down, right? If somebody says something, that maybe I didn't want to hear, if I have a bad reaction to it, everybody's going to notice that. And that might set people off, and it may make it hard to move forward. But if I'm calm about it and I ask maybe neutral blank questions, right, and actually get curious about things, the group will know that it's safe to say certain things in there, right? And we can attribute those things to the system. So presence, how you show up needs to be very intentional. And these are the different dimensions that you can use to combine to create your presence. So when you have a strong presence, you're really noticing, you're in the moment, and you can really kind of pay attention to the signals that you're getting from people in the system and find out where the edges are. This person seems to be kind of taking it on. This other person may have said some things that seem to be conflicting. This was in support and this wasn't. And so as you're noticing edges, it allows you to deal with things that come up all the time for us as Agile coaches. So those would be things like some unpopular voice in the room speaks. And now it's not the person, right? It's not the person that's unpopular. It's something that they said that maybe the group didn't want to hear. I'm sure this has happened to you many times in Agile coaching, and it'll happen again. But the stronger your presence, the better you're able to deal with that in the moment in a way that's skillful. And double signals are things like people that seem to be talking on both sides, both supporting some of these Agile changes and also either against or resistant or unsure of some of these Agile changes. And so when you notice double signals in the system, you can reveal that, right? And you can start to kind of draw that out to figure out what needs to get resolved to help, right? And once people are able to express some of this stuff, they're able to move forward. And then my favorite, since we were working with props earlier, if you're looking at my video, is the elephant in the room. And I use this all the time with clients when I'm working remotely, when I notice there's an elephant in the room. But it's that thing that's not being said. You just get this sense, right? Either people are kind of hinting at it, or you feel some kind of tension and people seem to be very reserved or holding back, and just something's there. And so if you have a strong presence, you're calm and you're noticing what's going on. And you're able to notice when the elephant is there, but people don't seem to be talking about it for some reason. That's a good question, Rebecca. So I don't want to attribute it to anything in particular. I think when you see these kinds of things, you don't want to attribute them to political or not political. So if you can see the question in the chat, I think you just want to notice something happened. Hey, I'm noticing that you're saying some things about yes moving forward, but I'm also hearing that here are the reasons that you're not going to get to it for a while. What do you make of that? Right? So you just draw out the facts that are happening. You don't try to guess why they're happening. You don't want to assign it to somebody. You may have a strong feeling that it's happening for a certain reason. Don't go there. You want to stay neutral in that because you need to really develop trust in the system. So I don't think you just want to notice and be factual. And that's how you can stay neutral in your presence. So Phil, given a strong presence, maybe we can look at how we can make an impact on people and start to change hearts and minds.
So, thanks, Mark. Do you want to just click through the animation? I'll talk through impact. So impact is the third dimension. So if you have appropriate authority and presence, that gives you the parameters for what intervention you can make. It is the theory. So your impact is determined by shifting, awareness, thoughts, understanding, or beliefs, by intervening in changing the agenda, the mindset, the emotional field in the room, and you can do that in a number of different ways. Powerful questions, humor. Impact is generally mismatching presence. So calling out the elephant in the room, for example, if you're the external coach, or if you're the internal coach even, which may be more difficult. I have no problem calling out the elephant in the room, and I do it with humor quite often, and it's quite impactful doing that.
Yeah.
So maybe there's another conversation around being an external agile coach and the benefits of that. So your impact is how you intervene, how you shift the thinking in the room, how you change the understanding, the thoughts, the conversation, the dialogue in the way that you intervene. And I'm conscious that we are just on time. Is that right? So we've got a good bit of time for any questions. This is, I'll let you talk through this, Mark.
All right. So you're here today and we're talking about how you can increase your impact as an Agile coach. These are some questions. You might just take a screenshot of this and take this away with you, which is really, how might you increase your authority, your presence, or your impact? So it's all about self-assessing where you're at on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the best on any of these dimensions. And then doing things like, how might you increase your authority? We showed you the Agile coaching growth wheel. Maybe there's something there where you're weak and you could be better. Maybe you want to become the next Kanban queen. If there could be another, I don't know. It might be a Highlander moment. Yeah, there's only one. All right, maybe don't go there. We don't want to upset Helen. But there's things under presence, right? Like, how would you describe your presence now? I showed you all those icons, right? How would you describe your energy? How would you describe the use of your words? How would you evaluate yourself? And then how does your presence change under stress? Maybe you're doing great when there are no problems, or there don't appear to be any problems, but you could be missing opportunities. And then under stress, you may become somebody completely different. You may be scared of what's happening. So just starting to notice that. Huh?
A question to think about is, what does impact mean in my current context? So I think that's different for everyone, potentially.
Yeah, context is everything. Each system is different and unique. There's certainly things that you can find that are common about it, but the people people are different, and each person might be different from day to day based on what happened with them at home, what's happening with them at work. So just a few questions for you to really think about and take away, something that's more of a call to action, so that when you leave here, you've got something you can go work on. So Phil,
So
would like to maybe open the floor, or do you want to
yeah,
talk about anything?
we can share this with anyone who wants it.
Yeah,
And is there a final slide, Mark?
there is this.
Yeah.
This is what we told you. And we appreciate you showing up today during your day, your evening, your morning, all across the globe. And we can take some questions. And I know some have rolled in earlier that may have been answered, and some are rolling in now.
Brilliant. So let's give Phil and Mark a round of applause before we kick off with those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. So we have got a question in the chat. So we have got, it's from Minnie. Oh, I love that name. Do we have an example of what a day in the life of an Agile coach is? God, I think it's a whole different session, isn't it?
Sounds like it. Yeah, it's certainly not for the next 10 minutes. Yeah, I think what you should do there, Minnie, is reach out to either Mark and I, and I'd certainly be happy to talk you through a day in my life.
Yeah, same. The invitation's open if you want it.
There you go. Sounds like a great opportunity to connect there, Minnie. Sorry, couldn't answer it. Rebecca, over to you. You've got your hand up.
Thank you. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, so I think we would all agree that talking about failures is really important for learning. And I find when you're working with teams and stuff, that can be really useful. But I find there to be a really low tolerance for that when you're talking to leaders, meaning the leaders are expecting you as an Agile coach to nail absolutely everything with no room to ever be wrong or not have experienced something. And so how I'm finding that so bizarre, because showing your weakness is so effective with teams and building trust and learning together. But then there's this weird block where I feel like with a lot of leaders, I have to really, I guess, hide that or not be authentic, or just deal with getting like a slap for any misstep you make or bad call you make.
Yeah. So my take on that is that it's part of the contracting piece, that always be contracting piece. Yeah, I've certainly seen and will see in the future what you've just described, and I don't think I call it's a nut that hasn't been cracked. So I don't think there's a systemic contracting approach, which like an off-the-shelf kind of approach.
Sure.
Which we can go to. But I've spoke to Mark, the last couple of weeks about, and some others actually. Maybe it's something for the CEC community, Helen. How do we mitigate that? How do we address it? How do we surface that before it occurs? Acknowledge it, surface it, discuss it.
I'll add to the response, if you don't mind. I love that piece, right? I think having a discussion when you first take the role, and let's say you're working with an area and there's a leader in that area, being able to have a conversation with them around, this is not going to go perfect, right? And the intentions of this, and we're aligned on these things. We're going to have things that go great and things that are going to need your support and help. I'm going to make missteps at times, but I'm going to do my best, and the intentions will always be good. And I'm going to work on my experience, and I'm never going to make the same mistake twice, right? And anytime that I do something, I'll own it, and I'll learn from it. And you'll see how I get better as a result, and how your people get better as a result. So do we agree to work this way, and to when I make a mistake, when something comes up that's not smooth, how we're going to deal with it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca. We've got a question in the chat from Anna. How do you go about getting professional reflective practice?
Well, you could reach out to me. So, well, I don't know if there's a register on the ICF. You can find on the ICF website, there's a list of trained, accredited, qualified supervisors.
So Phil, I might look at that answer in two ways, right? So we're thinking specifically about people in the Agile coaching community. Not all of them are going to be professional coaches, right? So there's a subset of the ICF coaching community, the global coaching community. They may be better equipped to provide you supervision, and there's some, I think, that may be less equipped. You have to find kind of the right fit for you, but that's certainly a place you could go. I would also think that the guide coaches might be good resources for that, which are the people with CEC and CTC in their title from the Scrum Alliance. Fair?
Yep. There was also another one from Anna saying it would be good to see an example contract. So obviously, you guys haven't got an example contract of that, but I've just popped a link into the chat channel of one of my friends. They've created like a canvas within Mural, which you can use for one of those contracting conversations. But if you have a look at that, then it'll give you some examples of the types of questions that you can ask, and you would typically do that in collaboration with the people or the organisation that you're working with. So worthwhile having a little look at that.
Yeah, and it's thank you for that. And it's funny, Phil and I actually talked about whether we should put an example there or not. Just so you know the behind the scenes.
Jaydeep has also got a question. How important is specific domain knowledge for an Agile coach? Ooh, always a burning one. What do you boys think?
Well, I don't feel it's important. I've worked across pretty much every industry that there is, I think. The industry I'm working in now, I have not got a clue what the guys are doing. And there's a number of different reasons for that, but I do not believe it should impede you. The people who are doing the work know best how to do it. It's our role to support them in creating the environment that, supports their effectiveness, is my view.
Yeah, and I share that view. I'll just add, there is a danger, right? Sometimes it's seen as a strength. It's also kind of a weakness. If you know too much about a particular domain, you might be tempted to enter in the conversation more as a domain expert than as a coach, and your role is really as a coach. So it's a little bit of a slippery slope that you may get into, or you may have some biases that creep in about their solutions, about what they're discussing, about whether you think that's right or not, and now you're in a completely different role than an Agile coaching role. So it's really hard to stay neutral sometimes.
Rebecca, you had another question. It was a long one, so I'm going to let you ask it because you're happy to come on camera.
Sure. And Phil started to answer in chat too, but I think I was part of a RIF in November, so I've been reflecting on sort of the changes of that. And I've seen historically, whenever leadership changes, they tend to wipe out the coaches and kind of start over. And so, I'm thinking like, what could I have done differently? And I will say we did try to contract with them, and there was just a refusal. It was like they kept kind of repeating, we need you coaches to show us what good looks like. And we were like, yes, let's talk about what good looks like so that we're kind of aligned. I don't know. So I'm just wondering, how do you get ahead of these kinds of scenarios? I think the answer is contracting is the best we can do. But yeah, I'm kind of trying to wonder out loud, what can you do when you experience a full leadership change?
I mean, that has to be the answer, because you have to align on them and you have to figure out what's important to them. And if you're working at cross purposes, they think one thing's important and you think another, you're never going to succeed.
Right. Thank you.
Mike, over to you. You got your hand up?
Yeah, quick question. So I'm thinking about coaching, and like when you look at, say, sports coach, someone hires a sports coach, they want to get better at maybe their football. So like it's clear that there's a contract there between them. They want to get better, they hire the coach. Yeah. Some of the challenges that I'm facing is that the areas that I have to go into, they didn't hire me as a coach for that area, but they wanted at a central level, they want those people to get the coaching, if that makes sense. So they're like Luke Water in terms of, yeah, maybe coaching, not sure about that. whereas the people who hired me, they want to give everyone coaching, but the actual recipients aren't as excited about it, if that makes sense. So how do you deal with that kind of situation where the recipient, so it's like maybe the football manager wants to give all the players coaching, but some of the players think they're good as they are, you know, their football skills are great already. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. So we talked a little bit about the system, and I think it's funny. Anytime you talk to teams or even individuals, if they have less self-awareness, they tend to rate themselves higher. If they have really high self-awareness, they tend to rate themselves lower than everyone else. And as a general rule, that happens in teams and organizations. And I think what you look for is, how might we get a sense of how this group is doing? And so you might look at, what are the measures of success for the group? And you're looking for, who do they serve and what purpose do they serve? Why do they exist? So I always gravitate to these kinds of things, and I'd be having them ask their customers. I'd be looking for metrics that prove that things are going great or not great, either operationally or in service to their customers, and looking for places that are gaps, and seeing if those are what would be possible for them, or what would it mean to them if they were to fill those gaps. They have to find some kind of purpose or meaning, or otherwise it's all nonsense. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. I just give me some ideas. I'll think about that. Thanks, Mark.